I can't hear it.
There we go. Hi, Sue. I think we're just about to start shortly, so I think that's why there's not much sound.
I can hear a background sound now where I heard absolutely nothing before. So I'm glad, yeah, I'll be able to hear people. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We'll be starting shortly. We're expecting over 100 colleagues to join us today. So if you would like to go and grab a quick drink, please do so. And we're hoping to start in 2 or 3 minutes' time. Welcome everybody. In the interest of time, I'd suggest that we start the presentation. So could I just remind colleagues that if you're not presenting, we'd appreciate if you could turn your camera and your microphones off, please. We are expecting colleagues to join as we progress, but hopefully that's not going to disrupt our speakers too much. So just a brief introduction. My name is Sunny Kelsey-Lillico and I am the chair of PPN Midlands. Before we introduce our amazing speakers for our session, we just thought we'd do a little bit of a plug for all of you on the call in the midst of Psychological Professionals Week. And just a reminder about who are the psychological professionals. We're an expanding group of professionals. I think we're into 21 occupational groupings now. So if you ever want to find out more information, find out who we are, please do have a look at the Health Careers website and of course our PPN website to tell you a bit more. Next slide, please. As a psychological professionals group for England, one of the things that we are guided by is our vision for psychological professions. And that's orientated across 5 key planets. And one of the things that we're really proud of here in the Midlands are the range of projects that are linked to those different projects. And we're really keen to hear, particularly from our colleagues around the Cancer Alliance, about how they are supporting our vision to unite and increase diversity, to make health and care psychological, and how we're actually putting people first. Next slide, please. Just a bit of a snapshot for us. When people ask about the PPN, which is a network, they often tend to be in befuddlement, I guess, about the Midlands, about what areas we're actually covering. Well, we have one of the biggest geographical areas, so our network reaches East and West Midlands, coast to coast, and bumps up to Yorkshire and down to Gloucester. So we have a very, very big group of ICSs, but also a huge array of members crossing the diversity of all the professions as well. Next slide, please. Just a quick snapshot about some of about who we actually are. I've introduced myself. In the background, we've got James, who's our program manager, and Nick Glover, who is our project support officer. And there's a range of other colleagues who we are supported by, including one of our speakers from today, James Parker, who's also one of our leadership fellows. This network relies on a team, and we are an expanding and changing team over time. But do reach out to us if there's anything that you think we could support you with from a psychological professionals workforce or positive practice point of view. Next slide, please. Here's just a bit of a snapshot. So I think in terms of our membership, just so you know, for the Midlands, our membership is over 1,500, near 1,600 and rising. We're one of the few regions that provide a weekly bulletin. So if you haven't had one or you would like to have some regular comms from us, we keep it very bite-sized, not to fill up your inboxes. Please do reach out to us. And we're engaged in a whole host of stakeholder type conversations, and we are also extremely fortunate here in the West Midlands and East Midlands to have retained both our specialist portfolio managers for mental health alongside our specialist portfolio manager for cancer and diagnostics, which basically for us in the region, it means that we have specialist expertise covering a range of areas in which psychological professionals will work. Next slide, please. Just for a reminder, we are in day 4 of Psychological Professionals Week. All of the presentations that have taken place around the country will all be uploaded and available on the main PPN website. So please do reach out and look out for any sessions that you weren't able to participate in. They've covered everything from new roles to the launch of our psychological practice in physical health and care, which was our in-person event yesterday. Next slide, please. And now, actually, we're moving on to our session with our speakers. as I said at the start, we have 5 planets that actually guide our vision and our values of how we do things as a psychological professionals group in England. And one of our tenets is how we make health and care psychological. And part of that commitment is how we actually are working together with health and social care services to deliver psychologically informed care. So I'm really pleased that we are able to hand over to colleagues to lead on that for our Cancer Alliances. So next slide. And again, over to you, Sahil.
I'm just going to do a quick introduction before Sahil starts his section. Just to thank you, Sunny, for the invitation, for coming along and doing a talk today. Kind of will showcase some of the work we're doing here in the kind of East and West Midlands, working along with the Cancer Alliances. So you'll have a few speakers today, so I hope it will give you a really rounded view of I guess some of the context nationally, and also then what's going on in the East and West Midlands. So Sahil will give us some of the background. My colleague Jo Levene, unfortunately, is not able to be here in person, but she's done a great job of recording her session. So there will be a set of slides from Jo that she's going to talk to, which is pre-recorded. And then we also have an expert by experience, Sue, who will be talking in 2 different sections today. I'm going to make the most of her expertise before she retires. And also a short section from myself, and then my colleague Rachel Holland will be kind of drawing things to a close. So yeah, you've got quite a few experts in their field today.
Wonderful, James. Thank you. Before I hand over to you fully, can I just also ask colleagues that if you're not presenting, can you please turn your cameras and your microphones off so that everybody gets the most out of this session, and I will do the same, James. Over to you both.
Lovely. Right, Sahil, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gerald. Just a quick apology to everybody as well. You may hear me coughing a little bit throughout the presentation. I'll try to keep it to a minimum. My name's Sahil Suleman. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist based working at University Hospitals Birmingham, leading on our cancer psychology service there under the employer of Birmingham Solihull Mental Health Trust. In the psych-oncology world, I previously had leading on West London as well. So what I'm going to try and do is just, as James said, set a little bit around where we are in terms of psychological professions, cancer alliances, why we're even talking about this in the first place, really. Next slide, please. So I'm mindful that we have a range of people on this call today, so I'm just going to start by kind of explaining why this field even exists, the different terminology that might be used around it, and some of the basics that are out there that tell us of what should be happening, what services should look like, before sort of coming on to some of the recent history of how sort of cancer services and cancer strategy has evolved, how psychology has evolved, and how sort of worlds have aligned at the moment to try and get us to this position that we're in now, and really to think about homing in on that role that Cancer Alliances can now play for us as a psychological professions group in really kind of pushing forward that strategy that Sunny helpfully outlined. So psych-oncology sounds like a very wordy term. For those of you that work in the field or know the field, will make a lot of sense. Other people might hear terms like cancer psychological support, cancer psychosocial support. There's various variations, but what we're really talking about here, following on from what Sunny was describing in terms of making care psychological, it's really about making cancer care psychological in that respect, in terms of what we do. And again, I probably wouldn't need to tell you all this, but for those, just for kind of completeness, it's pretty understandable and expected that there will be a psychological component to the experience of cancer, whether it be anything through from experiencing the diagnosis of and the rough treatment that could go alongside, kind of navigating what comes after a cancer treatment and the rehabilitation challenges, navigating threats to mortality and the potential of facing end-of-life care, the impact it has on the patient, on their families. I could go on, and that's what we do as psych-oncologists often, is we talk about this as our bread and butter. But I guess the reason I spell that out is that what people would assume is what we're therefore doing is sitting in a room treating patients, doing therapy, offering evidence-based treatments to these patients to support them through their cancer care. And yes, that is a chunk of what we do, without a doubt. It's something that we all enjoy doing as therapists, but what we also get to bring as a range of psychological professions is a much more system-wide way of working, really, into the impacting cancer care, which I think hopefully will come out through a range of the aspects that we'll be talking about in today's talks. I guess some of the key areas that we see ourselves working in would be around sort of providing training to other cancer colleagues in terms of enhancing their ability to be able to identify, assess, and even kind of provide some early intervention around psychological needs, psychological distress, with a view to them being able to pass things on to us as and when needed. With the skills to be able to work in that sphere and to be putting psychological care alongside the very physical components of cancer care, but also providing the ongoing supervision that can be necessary to allow those skills to be consolidated, enhanced, to move with the times as we move with the times and cancer care changes and we face various changes and navigate different ways of delivering cancer care, which obviously we experienced quite a lot most recently through the impact of COVID. But also just that recognition that our colleagues navigate a very tough way of working as well, and therefore that a lot of what we are providing through that supervision, whether it be directly or inadvertently, is a more sort of staff support oriented spaces, really, to be able to support our colleagues with dealing with distress and sort of holding the challenge that is working with cancer and, frankly, very difficult themes like death on a very regular basis. Another area where we see ourselves working quite a lot is the more consultative system reality is that not all patients will be coming to us, may not want to come to us, may not need to come to us, and that's absolutely appropriate. But certainly when we think about working with complexity, working with patients that may have pre-existing mental health issues, a lot of the work we're doing is really working with our teams. And again, that comes back to really making care more psychological, really in terms of getting them to be able to hold in mind the patient holistically, to hold in mind the patient's complex needs, pre-existing mental health needs, the whole breadth of that, really, to ensure that all the care that patients receive is informed by the knowledge that we can bring as psychological professions. In doing so, obviously, we also look at enhancing our workforce and growing our workforce through teaching we provide on courses, and ensuring that we are really getting that information out there. As cancer care grows, the psychological professions that go alongside also need to grow too. But I guess what we're also going to be talking a little bit more about today is really how we sort of integrate ourselves more into cancer care at a more system level. And I guess the key areas that we're seeing that happening more and more at the moment, and we'll have seen in the last few years, which we'll be talking about in a bit more detail, are really kind of how we integrate ourselves into cancer pathways a little bit more directly and more broadly, not sort of really being pigeonholed as a sort of, okay, treatment's happened, then a psychological need comes up and then we treat that, but instead really thinking about where we can be enhancing the entire cancer pathway from the point of diagnosis, from the point of early treatment and support, supporting sort of prehabilitation offerings. People have often heard about rehab, but prehab is certainly a buzzword we're hearing a lot more. But enhancing personalised care as well, and really thinking about patient satisfaction and the quality of care that's being provided to our patients. Excuse me. But also then really taking that step back, which is something we've seen a little bit more in the last few years, more detail, from very acute cancer care focus that we can sometimes see, where the cancer hospital where you go get your treatment is where the psychology or the psychological professions might sit, but instead broadening out to how we work with mental health services, how we work with the community, GPs, primary care, third sector offerings, to really think about a much more system-oriented way to providing psychological support in cancer care, but also the leadership we as psychological professions can provide in doing that and driving that. This is really our area, it's what we know best, and it's allowing ourselves to kind of inhabit that space a lot more. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour for what this is all about. Next slide, please. This is just a bit of a snapshot of what a sort of psycho-oncology MD team may look like. There are probably very few in the country that could say they have all of these under their armories, possibly different combinations of them. And there isn't a right or wrong. This is just an example of what we can commonly see, whereby often by consultant level practitioner psychologists, with some more kind of mental health trained professions operating, whether it be practitioner psychologists or even possibly some liaison psychiatry input, therapists that are psychological professions that might be working either within a single modality that they may have specialist training in, looking at CBT, looking at art, drama, music therapy, psychosexual therapies, or therapists that do have that sort of broader way of working that may not be so focused on sort of mental health need, but more sort of supporting with the sort of psychosocial adjustment component of what can come up within cancer care, working with children, families, but also neuropsychology has a part to play as well within the cancer sphere. So the reason I flash this up isn't to say this is what one must have, but really just to demonstrate the breadth of psychological professions that are implicated by how we deliver cancer care, and just to show that there's room for more. There's always room for more as well within that. Next slide, please. So, as we alluded to, our involvement in cancer care is not entirely new, but has gone through various sort of key points of change. And I could take, again, a whole hour just talking about every little change that's happened in cancer care and how it might have impacted psychological professions. But I just wanted to highlight a few points that are probably most relevant here. So cancer networks were something that were formed in sort of 2000 as a way of encouraging sort of cancer services and colleagues to work in a slightly more joined up, standardised way. Still very NHS focused at that point in time. In 2004, most psychological professions will be familiar with this. It remains, despite being nearly 20 years old, a very, very influential piece of work that was done in publishing some nice guidance that really started to spell out where we as psychological professions fit within cancer care, both in terms of service delivery, but also specific requirements for training and supervision that might go alongside that as well. Would I just be able to ask, for, that's it, microphones and videos off, wonderful, thank you. So lots happened between 2004 and 2017. I won't sit here and say nothing happened. Lots of different organisations came along, networks, vanguards. I could come up with all sorts of jargon. I think what we would have seen and known is that systems change quite frequently. However, I think in 2017, what we saw was the formation of cancer alliances, which I'll spell out in a little bit more detail shortly. But this, for us, has kind of been a turning point that we continue to reap the benefits of today. Sort of in parallel with that, there was some work that happened down in London when I was based down there as well, where we saw some commissioning guidance emerging as well, which I'll talk a little bit about. And I'll talk a little bit about some work that then trickled down more from sort of top-down NHSE level. So I'll just home in on a few of those in a bit more detail. Next slide, please. So with the London work, what we saw was the sort of first big publication of some real guidance for commissioners about what cancer psychosocial support should look like. So this is moving from a kind of clinically oriented, this is what we should be doing, to actually guiding our commissioners, guiding those with the purse strings to say, this is what you really need to be making sure is happening in your patch. And it was sort of a really massive step forward, really, in looking at integrated pathways that were not just about what happens in acute care, but really thinking about the patient as they move between hospitals, community, back and forth, as we know is very common within cancer care and within a range of physical health conditions, and navigating all the different components of their cancer journey through diagnosis, treatment and beyond. And also really looking at the extent to which how much of that care is very specialist and needs people like in that psycho-oncology MD team that I described earlier, but also there's aspects that may correlate to more kind of enhanced levels and a more universal offering, really how all cancer care needs to be more psychological in different ways as well. A lot of this tallied very much with terminology that you may have heard from the NICE guidance in 2004 when they talked about kind of level 1 to 4. That terminology does still very much exist, particularly people talking about level 2 training and supervision for nurses, clinical nurse specialists, for example, who may be working in cancer care. But what this guidance also did was really to start focusing on emphasising how we develop stronger pathways between other providers, mental health providers in particular, looking at long-term conditions pathways in what were IAPT services at the time, talking therapies for anxiety and depression services, but also positioning psycho-oncology services as really holding a lot of that specialism and being able to offer more in terms of system leadership and sharing expertise. So really sort of pushing forward psycho-oncology as sort of a hub to be able to ensure these pathways can develop fully. Now, London wasn't the only place this was happening, and we'll be hearing about work from the East Midlands and subsequently what evolved in the West Midlands. But it was just a real privilege to be a part of the work down there and seeing how that has now played out in years that followed. Next slide, please. I'm not going to say too much about this slide. I don't want to steal Sue's thunder. Sue's going to be talking a little bit more about this, but our next sort of big opportunity, and it's a horrible word to use in the context, but came sort of following COVID, because what COVID did was impact cancer care significantly. It was very hard to not watch the news and see the impact it was happening on cancer waiting times, surgeries being cancelled, and those of us working in cancer care felt it very strongly as well. The NHS Cancer Programme at that time did pull together a psychosocial support task and finish group really to look at what is going on for psychosocial care and what should be happening. I won't go through this in any more detail, as I know Sue will talk about it a bit more, except just to say that really this was, I guess, the first time we were really seeing information really trickling down from sort of national level for some time, telling us exactly what we should be doing and what cancer alliances should be doing. I'll talk about what they are in a moment, in terms of paying attention to psychosocial need in our patients and not just focusing on the physical, which was a real shift, I guess, in terms of in the narrative. Next slide, please. So what is a cancer alliance? I could have talked about this earlier, but the reason I mention it here is because it's something that sort of is fairly recent in terms of that evolution in history. They were established in 2017-18. As I mentioned, cancer networks had existed before that, but there was a recommendation from what was an independent cancer task force at the time, who were looking at a national cancer strategy, that what we needed to be doing better, and this is probably a theme that's emerged all week really, is to shift away from this very NHS focused care needs, but as counting to much more collaboration between NHS bodies, but also how that fits with government, charities, patient groups, between kind of physical health and mental health providers, and bringing together as well and much more of that kind of clinical and operational into one space, rather than it being clinicians not knowing how things work in practice operationally, or operational folk not really being connected to the clinical realities on the ground. So much more of a push for that operating at sort of system level. And as you can see, there's the 21 of these that were set up across England at the time. So there we are across the Midlands there, hovering, taking up that big meaty space across East Midlands and West Midlands, which we'll be hearing about subsequently in this talk. Next slide, please. So why do you think these cancer alliances even matter to us? The reason I think this sort of talk is kind of important is coming about is because these cancer alliances have given us psychological professions an opportunity really to influence strategy and to sort of an obvious place to push ourselves forward. The cancer alliances have tended to have cancer boards within them, clear pathways within them for how breast cancer is delivered, how lung cancer is delivered, but also pathways and boards that may be looking at specific components of care, whether it be personalised care, care and transformation of care, quality of life. And what it's allowing us to do is kind of find ways to sort of shoehorn our way into how care is delivered. And this had happened in previous networks before, but it's sort of allowed for potentially a little bit more parity in that respect about how we can influence cancer strategy differently. Ultimately, it also matters because it seems to be where a lot of money is sitting at the moment. So it does provide us with opportunities to make improvements and to demonstrate where actually what we can offer, maybe supporting what cancer alliances are trying to achieve, which I'll be talking about in a moment, as well as really being part of an organisation who are focused perhaps a little bit more than our very local providers on innovation and on different ways of working, which in a way really tallies quite nicely with how we often work as psychological professions in wanting to take that step back and just to formulate a little bit in terms of what's in front of us. So being able to innovate rather than seeing kind of service delivery as a one-time deal that you've got a service, job done, actually being part of and influencing cancer alliances is allowing us to really put our hands up and say, well, we can help with this, we can help with that. It's also important because ultimately these cancer alliances are sort of the funnel for a lot of the national vision of how cancer care is delivered now. So it is where we will often hear about things first, and similarly where we'll also be able to funnel things back up and share good practice to ensure that any good things that happen, local cancer alliances are finding their way out our localities and really impacting cancer care nationally as well. Next slide, please. So the other main reason it matters is that in terms of the actual strategic priorities that our cancer alliances are tasked to deliver on, they're pretty relevant to what we do. So from the NHS long-term plan and indeed beyond that, the cancer alliances have sort of key things that they're areas that they focus on. Some of them will feel very sort of cancer, very medical, but actually the more you kind of scratch beneath the surface, the more you can see there is something that psychological professions can offer to pretty much all of these. As you might expect, making sure patients are receiving timely diagnosis of cancer, getting patients diagnosed as early as possible, means that they are more likely to have more optimal outcomes that follow. And everything from supporting early diagnosis through to kind of the nature of the treatment that follows, they are areas that, as I mentioned, psychological professions can be supporting from the word go in terms of optimizing how diagnostic pathways work, supporting with patients who may not otherwise be accessing a diagnosis, understanding barriers to accessing screening and engaging with cancer care, and all those skills that we've got as psychological professions can be really supporting from the word go in terms of cancer strategy implementation. So as I say, looking at diagnosis, the nature of the treatment itself, how it's being delivered, not just have we jammed a needle and do X number of times, job done. No, what's the quality of care here? What are the relationships like here? How are we ensuring that the care is being provided is equitable? And again, we have a lot to offer here. We know that there are health inequalities within the mental health sphere that we talk about a lot. There are health inequalities that come up within cancer, and indeed there's this massive Venn diagram of areas where we know that there are patients who may be disadvantaged in one area are more likely to be disadvantaged in another as well. So we as psychological professions can provide support here to look at experience, to look at clinical outcomes as well. Quality of life I talked about as well. It's something that more recently has become something that we are, as services now, required to report on with the introduction of a national quality of life dashboard and a metric that patients are asked to complete. Which again is a bit of a shift in care and the shift in the narrative in cancer care more recently to be focusing a little bit more tangibly on quality of life for the first time. So again, we as psychological professions have a huge part to play in ensuring that's done in a meaningful way. And the last one I put on there really is about workforce, and it kind of links up to what I was talking about earlier in terms of the challenge of just delivering cancer care. It's something that we saw emerge even more so through COVID and beyond. Where we know that there are challenges in recruitment and retention into cancer care, staff who will experience burnout, staff who just do find cancer care incredibly challenging, understandably so. And we have a role in being able to offer our expertise to support these staff to support at a more strategic level about how are we supporting our workforce appropriately and providing what is needed. So we have skills to offer here. Next slide, please. You'll be relieved to hear last slide from me. The last reason it matters is because it's just become very relevant right now, whether it be through the sort of more recent NHS cancer programme recommendations that I know Sahil will be talking about in a moment, whether it be through the formation of the ICSs and the fact that there is a big restructure going on and just dust maybe starting to settle in certain areas about how these ICSs are working, how cancer is organised in each of your regions. Now is the time to be able to be getting in there and to be able to, as psychological professions saying, and we can help you deliver this and we can shape this with you now. I know certainly in my area, they've just been rewriting their cancer strategy for the next few years, and it's been an opportunity to shoehorn us in now and not just sort of be the afterthought that has to sort of wave our hands and say, oh, don't forget psychology, by the way. But similarly, as well as looking at psychology and mental health more broadly, there are very relevant cancer priorities in terms of patient experience that are being focused on over the last few and coming years, looking at the experience of patients with severe mental illness, patients with learning disabilities, autism, dementia, and again, whether it be the specialism that we can offer as psychologists in those areas, or just that broader ability to focus on more holistic care, we can support with these areas too. And it's all happening now. I guess this is my point really, is that this is all happening now. This guidance is coming now. So now is the time for us to be able to do this, and it's therefore a really perfect time for us to be having this webinar. So I'm going to hand back over to James. Thank you.
Thanks, Sahil, for that. Yeah, wonderfully comprehensive kind of overview of kind of where we've been and where we're at now. And yeah, and now I've got Sue, who's one of our patient advocates or kind of experts by experience, and she's just going to talk to us a little bit about their experience on the task and finish group for for the COVID-19 recovery group. So over to you, Sue. Thank you.
That's lovely. Thanks, James. And thanks, Sahil, for contexting where this task and finish group came in. Just to say hello to you all, I'm Sue Stocks. I'm a patient advocate, and it's now nearly 10 years since I had my diagnosis for breast cancer. And I very quickly worked out as a Stoic acceptor that managing my headspace was the biggest issue that I had to deal with out of all my cancer journey and my cancer treatment. And so a priority for me became helping me and other patients to manage our headspace through that treatment and to get the best support. In January 19, I was asked to join the West Midlands Cancer Alliance Breast Cancer Expert Advisory Group. And a couple of months later, West Midlands Cancer Alliance asked me to apply for the NHS England Cancer Patient Public Voice Group, which was starting at that time. So I applied and very quickly got accepted. So next slide, please. The cancer PPV met 6 monthly and is a group of 40-50 experts by experience, and is a source for NHS England of input and reps for the NHS England projects. So having been on the PPV for a while, what happened was that weekly we got a bulletin saying, are you interested in joining the following project, which is starting up? And in April 2021, there was one which went round, which was about the psychosocial support task and finish group post-COVID. There was quite a lot of task and finish groups starting post-COVID. The psychosocial side for me in my time had always been very, very important, because I recognised it was the bit, we're supposed to be very stiff upper lip and, get on with it type of thing. But actually, we needed help with all sorts of aspects of our lives and managing our headspace. And so I applied on the 15th of April 2021 to join this group, and a week later had confirmation that I would be one of 2 public patient voice reps from the PPV on the group. You can see from the second bullet there were representations from lots of different groupings, an awful lot of charities in the group. And we got together very quickly. I think within a week or 2, we had our first telecon. They were only an hour and a half, and we had 3 telecons of an hour and a half between May and September 21. Peter Johnson, the clinical director of NHS England, was the chair. Leslie Smith, the Living With and Beyond Cancer lead, was there, and Emily Corser was the project manager. We got together regularly, and Leslie and her team moved things forward significantly over that time. Within that time, 7 recommendations were produced, and I'm not going to work on all those 7 recommendations, but I think the core one for me, which underpins all of this, is staff training. Everybody needs support through cancer treatment, whether it's the patient, whether it's the patient's other half or the family or whoever. And that happens at all level of medics. Clearly, the psychological specialists are needed for some, but every member of staff in the NHS provides that support. And the more support you get as you go along, the less pastoral care that's required from all those different members of staff. So staff training, making sure that psychosocial skills training was available, was there. Yes, Sahil, I've lost the presentation too. I don't know if somebody wants to put it back up. That's lovely, thank you. So moving on to the next slide, please. We were asked as Patient Voice to put together what it felt like being a patient going through cancer. And Mike Thorpe, who is now the chair of the PPV group, put together this very powerful statement, if you'd like to read it, which actually I'm having a physical response to this now as I recall how that felt, and how out of control and under the control of others it felt. We didn't need psychological support all the time, but just sometimes, because it is a massive change of having the medics taking over your life when you're going through the 6 months of diagnosis and treatment. And the signposting of resources is incredibly important because there is a lot of support out there in terms of the NHS, in terms of the psychological teams, and also externally in the third sector. But trying to find that is incredibly hard. And the new norm that we end up with all the side effects that come from the treatment is a really big shift and a really big change in our lives, which is tough. Next slide, please. So I'll focus on a couple of the recommendations that came out. The first one was that we ought to have a statement on what excellent psychosocial care in cancer looked like. Everybody recognised around the COVID-19 task and finish group that the provision had been inadequate before, and the standard that was being provided was not good enough. And although COVID was a vehicle, there was a long way to go from the pre-COVID periods. And so it showed that coming up with that view on what excellence looks like was really important. And next slide, please. And that moved forward by the NHS Cancer Programme and the Living With and Beyond team, developing a statement of intent, which describes what patients and their carers should have access to, what that vision looks like for the NHS, for the Cancer Alliances and the partners to provide. And so that there was that standard that everybody is there. And I believe this is embedded in the toolkit. The draft was produced in June 2021 for comment, but it took nearly about 9 months before it got approval and is now embedded in that toolkit. Next slide, please. The second recommendation I want to focus on is that there should be, in essence, a review of what psychosocial support was in place, where the gaps were, and what plans needed to be in place to fill those gaps. And this was the start of the work which is continuing now. And it should include a very broad view of psychosocial care, which came out of that statement of intent. Not just the psychological therapies that you all provide in terms of level 4, but also the third sector and the staff generally who are providing that support. There was a very strong focus in the group from some of the charities, particularly on children, teenagers and young adults. And of course, now we're getting diagnosis earlier and earlier. It was important to include them, but also those of us who, I'm 10 years on from diagnosis, and quite important to recognise that some of the side effects don't go away. They continue to be a problem. So that recommendation was carried forward. Next slide, please. And the this action was put forward into the Cancer Alliance Planning Pack in 2022-23. It was a massive focus for Peter Johnson and Leslie Smith to get to convince the Cancer Board that this was important, this was needed, because the NHS is very much about treating symptoms and not recognising we're whole people, and actually we need that whole holistic view in terms of treatment and care, including the psychological side of things. So it came into the planning pack. Next slide, please. And there was a proposal in terms of a timeline. If you could run through the next three, I think there's 3 square blocks. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. And suggested a timeline to work forward in terms of the mapping, working out where the gap analysis was, and the development plan going forward. And in the West Midlands, I was involved on the Psychological Expert Advisory Group that James chairs, and was happy to see the continuity of this work through to the focus on the recommendations, and of course now with Rachel joining us on the delivery. So it was very, very important that this move forward. Next slide, please. The other aspect of the work was that this gap analysis, etc., wasn't going to happen very easily unless we had something that pulled it all together and made it consistent. And Sahil talked about the London work and a toolkit. There was a recommendation that a toolkit was produced, and that was produced and supports the work that has been done. It was up to Cancer Alliances whether they chose to use it or not. I expect that most will have, and it provides that consistent approach to pull together the gap analysis and the way forward. Next slide, please. And part of that toolkit was to show the breadth, and this is one of the diagrams in the toolkit, to give Cancer Alliances a visual representation of what their pathway should and could include. So for me, it was a good experience. Everybody recognise things weren't in the right place and things needed to improve, and it was fantastic in 18 months or so to have seen going through from the initial conversation all the way through to delivery of the improvement plan. It's very unusual in anywhere to get things moving so quickly, but I guess the timing was just right, and change is happening at a great pace, and I was very pleased to be involved and to continue to be involved. Thank you. That's me done.
Thank you, Sue. I don't know if my camera has stopped working. It might have done, but yeah, I just want to say that is amazing, Sue. You have been a force to reckon with, obviously on a national level, but also locally for us in the West Midlands. So it is, yeah, it's lovely to hear about your work. And you'll be a huge loss when you retire imminently. So I'll be very sorry to see you go. But thank you. We will bring you back in shortly. And we now have the pre-recorded session, which hopefully Rachel is able to share. Technically, we were just, I want to make sure you've got sound as well as.
Hello, I'm Jo Levene. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist and psychology lead for the East Midlands Cancer Alliance. I'm going to talk about the experience of developing psychosocial cancer services in the East Midlands, and talk a little bit about the process that we've been through, how we're progressing 3 years on from starting this work, and sharing some of the challenges and the successes that we've had and the learning. The model that we use in the East Midlands is entirely aligned to the NICE guidelines of 2004 and the London model that Sahil would have already spoken about. but we shaped this locally to guide leads across the cancer systems in an aspiration to address the areas of unmet need, which were very evident across the East Midlands region. The model encompasses the whole cancer pathway from diagnosis through treatment, living with and beyond cancer, and during end of life. Just to say something about the East Midlands context, we have a population of just under 5 million, very mixed urban rural communities, some high levels of ethnic diversity, and as you can see from the slide, around 26,000 new cancer cases diagnosed per year with 12,000 cancer deaths annually, and around 170,000 people living with a cancer diagnosis. In terms of our systems, we have 5 integrated care systems, 8 acute hospitals, and 2 of these are regional treatment centres. To take this work forward, we developed a task and finish group with representation from across all 5 of our ICSs and a range of professional groups and organisations such as acute hospitals, commissioners, psychologists, talking therapists, that was IAPT at the time, Macmillan, and we drew upon existing data and some extensive engagement that had been carried out with patients in some of our localities. We mapped our current psychosocial support provision and we found the biggest gaps were at level 4. And we also did a workforce analysis to identify how many level 4 staff would be needed using the London modelling. And we worked out that we had a shortfall of 34.5 whole-time equivalent qualified psychologists to meet this need. We decided as a group to focus on starting to fill that level 4 need, given that the pathway very much relies on level 4 to support the other parts of the pathway and to take a systemic approach to psychosocial care. Our case for change had 8 recommendations, which were about providing support for people affected by cancer across the whole cancer pathway from diagnosis to end of life, across all 4 levels of psychosocial need, and that this would be available through primary, secondary and tertiary care services. We talked about the establishment of an IAPT cancer pathway and engaging with voluntary and community services to optimise available services and resources. This slide gives a bit of an idea of our timeline, which started in December 2019, was obviously affected by the pandemic, and was a process of writing the case for change, engaging with commissioners and getting endorsement for the case for change and the recommendations from all 5 of our STPs. There was a lot of work around financial modelling of our case for change and what that might look like for individual STPs. And this slide just shows one of the ways that we mapped progress of each of our systems against the key deliverables. The second part of our timeline was very much affected by the transition to ICSs and how that impacted financial commitments from our ICSs. We were very lucky that we've had financial support from both Macmillan and the East Midlands Cancer Alliance to pump prime posts so that we could start to recruit into psychology posts across all 5 of our systems. We see that we've had great opportunities and really benefited from a region-wide implementation of a psychosocial care model. We've been able to promote consistency across our systems and so reduce service inequities across systems. The pump priming opportunity from Macmillan and the Cancer Alliance has really enabled us to catalyse services where otherwise we would have been facing severe financial barriers to taking this work forward. There have been opportunities for networking throughout the implementation and delivery of the model development. And the model has enabled us to enhance integration across pathways. And we know that that provides a better service for our patients and better meets their needs. All of our systems are involved in a Macmillan-led evaluation, which we hope will provide us with some really robust data about the benefits of this approach. And ultimately, we hope that we'll be improving the experiences and outcomes for people living with cancer. We see this as the first step to building a system model at scale but it hasn't been without its challenges, not least making a case to commissioners for money at a time of great financial challenge, a time of change in funding models due to the move to ICSs and significant change in ICB personnel. We had looked at ideas for staggering the rollout, but we have been very concerned not to create further inequity in our systems, being very aware that across 5 systems, we've got different levels of maturity in terms of ICS development. The timescales and the deadlines have constantly shifted, and it's definitely taken us much longer than we might have initially anticipated to move towards implementation of the model. We have had to work hard with ICBs and commissioners to shift their focus from it being about health economics to quality, and we've been really well supported, particularly from Cancer Alliance leads, in having these conversations, because I think it can be really hard, especially at the outset of this piece of work, to demonstrate economic value. And it has just taken a lot of time to do the engagement work with our ICBs. We're very aware of competing pressures across our systems. The biggest risk to the success of our work has been around funding, as I've already said, but the other challenge has been around the level 4, the psychology workforce. In modelling that demand, we identified a large gap, and then it was hard to argue where we've seen a lot of difficulty with the recruitment of clinical psychologists and other psychologists that we would be able to fill posts even if we got funding, and particularly in the areas where our posts are fixed term. So far we've been lucky to have really good success with brilliant work from our psychologists across the region and being able to fill the vast majority of the posts that have been advertised. Our approach has very much been one of partnership working, and partnerships between the East Midlands Cancer Alliance, Macmillan, our integrated care systems and our provider, Acute and Mental Health Trust, has been key to the success of this work. In order to evaluate our work and the model, we've signed up to a national Macmillan-led evaluation, and the East Midlands is one of 5 areas which have been identified as part of Macmillan's national psychosocial work stream. The framework that's being used will encompass a range of tools and methodologies like patient outcomes, patient experience, workforce and patient surveys, and we hope that this will provide information around both the outcome and the impact of an integrated approach to psychological care for people living with cancer, for staff in the workforce and for systems, and we hope that there will be some economic evaluation in there as well. Our next steps are around supporting services to embed and integrate into their systems, building support networks of psychologists in oncology across the East Midlands and developing opportunities for things like peer supervision, shared CPD, and also seeing the benefits of having more posts so that we can offer more training placements and hopefully support and build a new psycho-oncology workforce in the future. Raising awareness of the programme across the East Midlands, for example, through engagement with other clinicians and expert clinical advisory groups, and using shared learning and networks to develop models of good practice across the region, for example, talking therapies, cancer pathways. We know there's a lot of work to do in promoting services, and we've got a lot of support from Macmillan in doing that, and also evaluating the services, which is going to be so important for building future business cases where we don't have that sustainable funding agreed. We've learned a number of lessons in this work. We've found that having a clear and simple shared vision across partners that we've been consistent about across time has been very important, as has system-wide engagement for the success of this work. We've realised that the model needs to be locally developed, as there isn't a one-size-fits-all for all of our areas. And making the case for investment in quality over cost savings has been really important to do, along with maintaining a gold standard aspiration and not agreeing that a watered down version would be good enough, rather that we continue to strive towards a gold standard. It's taken a lot longer than we would have anticipated to do this work, and we've learned that including finance colleagues from a really early stage is absolutely essential to the success of the work. I'd like to finish on what we see as our key successes. Our psycho-oncology workforce has increased from 5.9 at the start of the project at the end of 2019 to approximately 30 qualified psychologists at present, which includes 7 qualified psychologists funded by the East Midlands Cancer Alliance, additionally as part of the establishment of a regional centre for psychosocial health and cancer. We've been able to successfully recruit to the vast majority of these posts, and the partnership working between the East Midlands Cancer Alliance and Macmillan has really been key in our success. There's been a lot of work and success in building relationships with stakeholders and the maintenance of engagement through what has been a long process. The funding commitment from the Cancer Alliance and Macmillan has, as I've said, been really crucial to the success of the project, and we've been able to share the learning from our work in the East Midlands nationally through the National Psycho-Oncology Leads Network. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, James.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to unplug my camera and plug it in again because it seems to stop working.
Hey, thanks everyone. And also just meant to say earlier, in terms of taking a question, I think we're going to have time at the end of the webinar for one question. So if you have something burning, please put it in the chat. And obviously we'll open the floor at the end of the webinar for a question if you have one.
Lovely. Right, I'm here, but my camera is not playing ball for some reason. So I'll just make a start and I'll keep fiddling with it if that's okay. But yeah, I really valued all of those presentations. I think they've set the scene wonderfully. I guess I'm going to use my time just to go into I guess some of the how-to, some of the nuts and bolts of kind of getting to where we've got in the West Midlands, rather than giving you a blow-by-blow account of exactly what we've been up to, because yeah, it's probably not that kind of salient. But next slide, please. So I'll yeah, talk about, I guess, why we've linked in with the Cancer Alliance and why we've been meeting, how we got it up and running, some of our journey really, and then also the key stakeholders who we've kind of engaged with along the road, and actually some of the kind of skills or kind of requirements to kind of get to where we've got, and then just a little bit about where we're heading, what our plan is going forward. Okay, next slide, please. I'll draw the camera. Oh, look, it's working. Yay. Perseverance is the name of the game. So yeah, in the West Midlands, we've had historically a really engaged group of kind of experts in psycho-oncology, and we've kind of met over the years, and it's ebbed and flowed, but really in 2017 things kind of petered out with the kind of ending of the West Midlands Cancer Clinical Networks. And you know, it was somewhat of a fallow period, and I began to hear murmurings about people linking in with their cancer alliances, and I guess in the context of COVID, you know, we'd all hunkered down and got on with our own kind of thing, and I think services had changed. Actually, the demands on services had changed. I know our team kind of very much stopped clinical work for a while and focused on supporting staff, and we're returning to the clinical work and getting our waiting list back under control. So there was a real sense of like, actually, we haven't come together, we haven't connected, we don't quite know who's who and what's what. And So yeah, I guess I was thinking, I don't want to be missing out. Is everyone meeting and I'm just not invited? That was my concern. That was the FOMO. I didn't want to be missing out. So I kind of started to put out feelers in about October 2020. So if we move on to the next slide. So I started really basically by Googling West Midlands Cancer Alliance, finding out who they were, what they did, and I literally just emailed their generic email address saying, "Hi, I'm aware of you, and I wanted to let you know that I'm here. We used to meet as a group in 2017. Is anybody meeting? Am I missing out?" And a few months later, got an email back saying, "Oh, your email's been round to various different people, but it's great to hear from you. We're really keen to engage with kind of the psychological side of things," which, yeah, was music to my ears. So I hadn't missed out on anything, and I happened to, send my email at the right time when they were beginning to pick up on that. So Sahil and Joe have nicely kind of set the scene for why they were suddenly receptive and ready listening. So we began to put together some meetings. So I met with some people from the Cancer Alliance initially, just to kind of set out the scene, and actually they were very receptive, and we really had that sharing of passions, a shared value around supporting cancer patients and their relatives from a psychological perspective. And it felt like for years as psychologists, we're knocking on the door saying, "Has anybody thought about psychology for these patients?" And often it landed on deaf ears, and suddenly I found the door was ajar, and not only ajar, but people were listening, and people had the same views and the same values. So it was quite exciting to then convene a working group with the psycho-oncology leads that I knew quite a lot of them, and began to also widen that out and get some of the lead cancer nurses. And I think initially we probably missed people. So apologies for those of you who didn't make that meeting because you weren't invited. And it certainly wasn't out of malice, but just we were figuring it out as we went along. And I think by 2021, we began to have a regular monthly meeting where we'd meet for an hour a month and really come together and plan what needed to happen. And I think very quickly established we needed to do some scoping. And that landed just at the right time when we were hearing the same messages from the national team. And we were a little bit ahead of the game, I think, because I'd spoken to Joe and found out what they'd done in the East Midlands and they were way ahead. I was able to kind of go, "Oh, I might nick some of that." And so actually we were able to hit the ground running when that national kind of guidance came through. And also, managed to get really good people on the project. So we had Aisha Gerbenar in the Midlands who kind of led on the scoping work. And she held a couple of stakeholder events where we all kind of came together. And we've recently just had another stakeholder event with Macmillan. So that enabled us to come together in physical form and share those values and that strategy and ideas. Next slide, please. So just a very brief timeline. I won't bore you with it, but yeah, you can see we used to meet. Then kind of October 2020, we kind of began to put out feelers. And then actually by April 21, that was when we first met. And by December that year, the Cancer Alliance had agreed to fund this scoping project and had actually put money aside for an HC, which was Aisha's role. And also, rather than a project lead, I opted for a band 5 assistant psychologist because I knew what they did. And Aisha joined us in March, and partly because she was pregnant, but actually we had a very rapid kind of scoping over the summer, pulling together the reports, and yeah, bringing it all together in kind of 8 or 9 months. So it was a huge piece of work that she managed to pull off. And from that project, there were various recommendations similar to Joe's work in the East Midlands and the Cancer Alliance. And have funded that, and we'll talk a little bit about that and how that happened. But obviously the scene and the context was one ripe for this. You know, Leslie Smith and Emily Course's work at NHS England had meant that all of the cancer alliances had psychosocial on their radar, and the kind of West Midlands obviously had a really engaged group of psycho-oncology leads and so on to kind of carry forward some of the national recommendations as well as recommendations from our local project. And yeah, they've continued to be hugely supportive. So not only kind of funding those projects, but also then funding Rachel's role to implement some of those projects, and my own role as chair of that, what's now an EAG, the Cancer Alliance. And Rachel started with us just over a month ago and has hit the ground running. So yeah, next slide, please. So what I would say is that's a very quick potted history of how we've got to where we've got. But I think for me, I wanted to give you a sense of the work that's gone on behind the scenes to get us there. And I think initially what has enabled this to happen, certainly from my perspective, and this is to hopefully share learning. And you may well have already been doing this work and already have got there. And this will be teaching to suck eggs. But for me, having a supportive manager is a good starting point because it takes a lot of time, and I think that's the message you probably picked up from Joe's presentation. You know, meeting just by virtue of looking at this list and looking at all the people that you have to connect with, that does take a lot of time. And I by no means started out with a really clear plan and objectives and strategy. I have felt my way, figured it out as I've gone along. But these are some of the key people that I've met. And so obviously I've told you about meeting with the people from the Cancer Alliance, which started with an email and finding kind of kindred spirits, really. And also linking in with your local psycho-oncology leads. That's hopefully something you will all be doing anyway. You will know who's who and what's what. But actually being able to come together in a slightly more formalised context where you're supported, like we have great admin support who do minutes and record them and so on. You know, that's all funded by the Cancer Alliance. So yeah, getting to know those people. Having amazing people in your group like Sue, the kind of experts by experience, is invaluable because I think as psychologists we can do a lot of talking and thinking and planning, and actually I do think they bring us back to what are we going to do. That's all good and well, talking the talk, but yeah, let's see some action. Likewise with my ICB in Coventry and Warwickshire, I didn't know who my ICB cancer lead was, and nobody else did because they were new and they didn't know who was who and what was what. So again, a series of exploratory emails, just trying to find out who was out there and kind of what they did. And it meant that I ended up meeting quite a few people on that journey, kind of going, oh, well, it's not quite my role, but it does link in with it. And oh, you should meet so-and-so. All really helpful. So it has been an interesting journey. As I said, we've also had a recent stakeholder event with Macmillan, and so beginning to build those links. We've not had Macmillan clinical psychology, certainly in my area in South Warwickshire, so I didn't know who my rep was, and so it's lovely now to have a name and have a shared vision. We've also done quite a bit of PR about our work with the Cancer Alliance and our scoping work and the recommendations, and so we presented to cancer boards. So myself and Aisha and now Rachel will be kind of completing that work. And obviously some of the recommendations from our work have been about working more closely with talking therapies. So as part of that, we've linked in with their kind of regional QI manager, and that's enabled us to I guess do a bit of a pincer movement, top down kind of talking therapies being told you need to think about cancer as a long-term condition and engage with your kind of local psycho-oncology services, and then us actually making those links with our local talking therapy long-term condition leads, and saying, hi, we're here, we're wanting to work more closely, what are you up to? So we're really in, certainly my little locality in South Yorkshire, early stages of that, beginning to think about setting up task and finish groups. Yeah, the other thing to be mindful of is just making sure that people in your own trust and your own team kind of know what's going on. I think it's great doing this, well, I guess is system level working, which I didn't know that was what it was called. I was just meeting people, but lovely to work at that system level and let go of some of those historical, I guess, competition that you might have with other trusts and realise actually we're all here working on the same thing. But don't forget your own team and keep them up to speed with what's going on. So letting your oncology colleagues know. But also I think for me, because we've hosted a lot of the Cancer Alliance funding for various roles, making sure your finance team is on board and flexible. Certainly Jay mentioned that in her talk, but yeah, really, really important. Next slide, please. I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet here, but obviously meeting with all those different people does require that kind of willingness to kind of put yourself in a slightly uncomfortable position where you're meeting strangers. But I think coming together about shared values and really what's helped. And also I would say it's about what we're offering. I think I'm not going to people saying, you need to give me this now, this is what I expect from you. It's actually a really collaborative, and I'm offering my time and my expertise, and it's been well received. Yeah, so I guess it's, as I said, it's letting go of some of those maybe historical kind of, not grievances, but I know different trusts have been in competition, and so actually now we're in a culture and a kind of framework where we have to all play nicely together, and actually I want us to kind of work well as a region. So we have to let go of some of that history. Yeah, and I've talked about having a supportive manager. So yeah, next slide, please. So it sounds a little bit pompous, but I think in a sense, you know, if you are leading your local EAG or Cancer Alliance Psycho-Oncology group or whatever you want to call it in your area, don't feel like you have to know everything. I certainly am not the expert on everything. What I do know is I've got an amazing group of colleagues who, between us, know a lot, and I see my role as kind of shining light on some of their skills and their expertise. So getting them to kind of do what they do best. And sometimes that means I stand back and listen and really just encourage them to do what they do best. So yeah, I think I started out thinking, gosh, I need to be the expert and I need to know more than everyone else because I'm chairing or leading some of these changes. And I've kind of, yeah, let go of that a little bit. And as I said, yeah, I'm really fortunate to have some fantastic colleagues in my area. So great. And next slide, please. Yeah, so this is really just where we're heading from here, just to give you a very quick sense of that. But yeah, the various projects that the Cancer Alliance have kindly funded, we're progressing with, kind of beginning to put those together and rolling them out. We have a subgroup just working out some of the finer details. Yeah, as I said, still presenting to the cancer boards. And what our hope is, part of Rachel's role will be helping, because we're in a big area in the West Midlands. We're hoping to kind of, rather than lead all these task and finish groups, but certainly enable the local psycho-oncology leads to link in with their ICBs, link in with talking therapies, link in with Macmillan, and get a kind of task and finish group up and running. And we can lend some of that Cancer Alliance weight to that. Yeah, we're also hoping to develop those pathways with talking therapies across the West Midlands. They're going to look very different in different places. Different areas have got very developed talking therapies, and other areas are, yeah, they're starting from scratch. So it's going to be bespoke for each area, really. And one of our hopes is we can also have a kind of off-the-shelf business case that we can share amongst ourselves in the West Midlands for establishing some of these posts once the you know, funding from the Cancer Alliance or Macmillan or wherever has kind of run out. We want to be able to say, look, here's the Cancer Alliance kind of endorsed business case around psychology. Yeah, and so we're going to continue to work with Macmillan, and also, yeah, we're looking at our kind of level 2 offer, but also aware that, you know, there are things happening on a national level with Ascend, and so not wanting to preempt that too much. Yeah, and also you'll have heard Sahil and Joe just nod to the planning pack. So I just wanted to kind of let you know that the planning pack should be due out in December, and that will, again, we hope, kind of really reinforce the Cancer Alliances that yeah, we have a strong role to play in psychosocial support. Okay, thank you. I think that is all of my slides. So yeah, just back to you, Sue, just to give a bit of your experience about being in this group and part of this work that's happened in the West Midlands.
Lovely, thank you for that, James. A fantastic overview of what's been a wonderful project and wonderful working together. Just to give you a bit of context about me, I had my cancer diagnosis and I was a director in the Environment Agency. So I was already very comfortable with dealing with telecoms. Most of my work was done through telecoms because my team were all over the country. And I had a view that feedback is a gift, which will make some people squirm, but actually giving feedback in a positive way, so that those that deliver services know how they are landing and how they are being experienced is very important, because often if you don't receive feedback, you don't know how things are going. My focus was very much continuous improvement and diversity and inclusion, and I've been heavily involved in the Environment Agency in the development of a cancer network across the 10,000 member staff, so that the organisation supported people with cancer more. I was a director, but recognising, as James just mentioned, that you can't know everything and you can't do everything. And actually, it's the people doing the job who know how to improve things best, and not the person who's heading things up. So working together, and my role as an expert by experience was a really interesting one. I mentioned that I joined the Breast Cancer Expert Advisory Group in West Midlands Cancer Alliance in January 19. And I found it very interesting from my background, in terms of encouraging people and wanting people to move forward, that some of my other patient advocates dealt with things in a very different way from what I was comfortable with, and actually, you know, in some respects made me squirm. So this is about me and about how I dealt with things, but I know that you will, I'm sure, have experienced other approaches. For me, the approach of working together is that mutual respect. We all round the table, wherever we're working together, and particularly on the psychological AEG, we all want to make things better. We know it's not perfect. We know things need improving, but you are the professionals. You are the people who know how the processes and the systems work, and what those improvements are need to be. I don't know anything about that, but I can make observations from my experience, giving the patient's view in various perspectives in a relatively calm and unemotional way. I do get a bit passionate at times, but trying to give examples of the unintended consequences of some of the proposals from a patient's point of view. One I'll put forward is, you know, the all wonderful seeing marvels of the medication to take post breast cancer treatment, which basically depresses the hormones. Now, that's wonderful. It reduces the risk of the cancer reoccurring. But actually, the side effects that you get from that medication that you take for 10 years or so after your treatment are far worse than any chemo you could ever have. And you take them every day for 10 years. And for some patients, that can result in waking with hot sweats sort of 20, 30 times a night. So your sleep deprivation is massive and functioning in life is really difficult. So giving some of those examples from a patient's point of view of something which you talk to the medics and, oh, it's a marvellous thing, it's going to reduce your risk. But actually, the reality of it is very, very different. And having psychological help to work you through those things is really important. For me, working together was about encouraging and being very positive about little steps. We're never going to make changes overnight. Change is continuous. And sometimes things take an age to move forward. This particular project has moved forward incredibly fast, probably because people see the real value of it. But I recognise and encourage each positive step towards a goal. And everybody likes praise and appreciation, but it's about evolution, not revolution. I try not to criticise. I have heard other patient advocates with basically telling professionals that they're wrong, and you're not. You know your business. You're very good at your business and helping people. And I could not say that. But we will have different truths based on the same experiences, and they are our truths, and we need to respect those different views and approaches. And I really felt very, when I have expressed a view, I felt that has been accepted graciously. I've never been put down. I've never been told I'm wrong. So I feel that I've been able to integrate my experience from my work and my personal experience from my diagnosis, and bringing in other people's views and things together to hopefully sort of move things forward and just give that sounding board occasionally for things. And I really enjoyed it. I have been in some EAGs where actually it was extremely uncomfortable. Nobody wanted me there. And my other patient advocates were very, very negative, which made the whole thing hard. The Psychological working group, it's been a pleasure to be there, and I'm looking forward to hearing the projects moving forward and finishing. And I thank you all for your tremendous work that you do, making sure that people go through their cancer treatment and live beyond that cancer treatment in a great way. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. That's a wonderful bit of feedback. I think for all of us doing this work, it's really lovely to hear that, yeah, it's valued. And yeah, once again, thank you for all of your hard work. I'm aware we're almost at time. I want to hand over to Sunny just in one moment to kind of round things up. But just very quickly, I see Hannah's put a question on the chat about involving medical colleagues, and I would just say, yeah, we're really keen for our work to be embedded. I think the theme from yesterday's PPN was really about how we embed practice, and we talked about not being the icing on the cake, but being embedded. And I thought today, actually, we're the vanilla essence, and we need to be integral to the cake, not just the cherry on top. So thank you, everybody, and I will hand over to Sahil.
Thank you, everyone. And just in the last couple of minutes or so, I'd suggest, James, that we're not the vanilla essence, but we are the flour, the eggs, the butter and the sugar. Because actually there is something about what you've been able to demonstrate, all of you today, in your really thought-provoking and detailed presentation, is the importance of how we can actually work together, how if we are able to put competition to one side and remember what we're here to do, which is to provide the best possible care for as many of our service users and communities as we can, then actually by working together, by sharing, by learning, and by asking questions. I think there was a lot of bravery in what both of you have, all three of you shared, and taking that forward means that we can actually respond with both quality and rigor in terms of what we know needs to happen to improve patient care. I think the other thing I would say is, or a quick ask, if there was one thing that you would advise colleagues to do based on your experiences through the Cancer Alliances, what would you say?
I'd probably echo what you've just said, Sally, which is about being brave, actually, and reaching out to colleagues. I don't know if you want to come in, Sahil or
Sahil.
Rachel.
Persistence, just harass people, I would be my advice. They don't necessarily, I think you had some luck, you got a response at the right time, but I have to be honest, in other Cancer Alliances I've worked in, it hasn't always been as easy. Not always been met by very welcoming arms and open culture of wanting to do this. So now is the time to get things done, but it might be in 5 years. We're no longer flavour of the month in 5 years or 10 years, and something else may have come in. So it is also being aware that we need to continue to push the agenda through the hard times and the good, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Sahil. Rachel, Sue, anything you'd like to offer?
Sue,
I think for me, it seized the opportunity.
Yes.
It was there, and it moved forward massively quickly in NHS England, and then came through planning guidance. So it was all those business processes, which none of us like, but wow, it worked. And great stuff, and will be just fantastic for patients and for your teams. Will be satisfied with their work rather than dissatisfied because they can't deliver what's needed.
Thank you, Rachel.
Well, I'm gonna quote Sue here, and it's about leadership, and that's what we've learned from Sue. It's about leadership at every level, and you don't have to have leadership in your title to get your voice heard and use the voice that you've got. But really, I'm endorsing what Sue said and quoting Sue's stocks there.
Thank you very much. I think the messaging is also about persistence, dedication, and commitment. And there's something for me about having allies, but also really taking that position about being strong activists as well. So actually leading as well from the front. So on behalf of PPN Midlands, I just want to say thank you. I'm really proud that you are all working in our areas, and I look forward to more updates and more sharing of information and learning. I think there's a QR code that's been posted in the chat, so if there's any feedback that colleagues would like and people on the call would like to make, please use the link in the QR code as well to do so. All of the presentations will be shared. We'll ensure that they are uploaded onto our website. They will be freely available. And if there are any questions that colleagues on the call have, if you want to send those through to the PPN Midlands email account, we will make sure that they get out to the speakers for a response as soon as you can. On that note, thank you very much. If there's any more questions that are being posted through, we will forward those on. But on that note, thank you again for joining us today. It's been a really interesting and eventful event, and it's been a fantastic week. And for those of you who have got some time left in the afternoon, we have got another webinar at 3:30, which is on our skills transfer initiative within the Midlands. But thank you for joining us today.
Yeah,
Take care.
Thanks for everybody's passion and commitment. Thank you.
Oh,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sunny.
Thanks
Thanks,
all.
everybody.
Take care.
Great to see you.
Bye-bye.